How the public are programmed. Tell live vision. Okay, so an introduction quickly to the project. The project is really mainly about three things, which is understanding how to have good conversations, how to get through to people that are very resistant with different views, how to message effectively, how to make sure that when we do message, it's not dismissed, how we can get people to look at information and data, which has obviously proved very challenging over the last 2 years. And thirdly, how behavior works, how we're influenced. And that's going to be the focus of today. When we understand this, then we can better protect ourselves from unwanted influence, but also we can start to use it in an ethical way to influence others. Now, we've got very limited resources, so we focus on what we can practically achieve. We releasing this information to, obviously, onto our YouTube channels and many groups around the world. We're starting to reach a lot of groups globally now, and we're starting to see people really start to message more effectively. We have many, many podcasts which are shared through our messaging, which you will receive an email if you're on the invite list. Summary of part one. So today is part three, and we're just going to have a quick few minutes summary recap of the previous two parts. So in part one, we looked at what is conditioning. How are people taught? How do people learn to understand certain pieces of information? How do they understand that one thing is dangerous and one thing is not? There's two forms that this is done in, which is classical and operant, and we explain those in the video. And this really is how the GPS of our mind is programmed. And we're going to look at what we mean by the GPS today. And really, in summary one, we looked at how they were used, those conditioning functions, to create the only way out scenario. So you would have heard those words constantly for the last 2 years, because it was really a marketing slogan. It was really painted that there was only one way that you could leave the crisis, and that was to just do as you were told and take an experimental procedure. That was told as the only way out. None of the data actually supported that if you talk to most scientists, but it was a very good and very effective marketing technique. Now, this is one of the really ways the classical conditioning was created. It was to attach fear to the stimulus of seeing anything related to COVID. I think it's been proven now that people dropping dead in the streets wasn't a thing, even though these were the first few images that people saw. Now, I'm going to show a very interesting video now, really to show you how quickly people can learn from an experience or an image or a movie. Now, the pictures of dogs, but in fact, or the videos of dogs, but this really will, when you think about how quickly this part of the brain can learn. And there's quite a funny video. Now, that was first shown by Matt Hudson, and he's got a few papers published, which I'd highly recommend reading. Here's one of them. And it's really about how so much about information we learn really from a picture and experience very, very quickly. And if we don't always question those pictures, for instance, a lot of media, if they could effectively put any story or picture up there, and if we didn't question it and took it at face value, they could effectively teach us or have us learn or condition to believe things that might not be true. So that was part one. Part two, we looked at the vehicle metaphor, the driver, the passenger, and the GPS, and how understanding this metaphor can really provide a lot of power in understanding what drives people's behavior. We looked at 10 key points to understanding how the mind is programmed and how it works. And we looked at a few important points, resolutions. So in quick summary, how understanding the human mind is really, if Joe wants to understand how he works, how he behaves, he wants to understand there's three main aspects. And this is a metaphor to make it simple to understand. There's this thinking part of the mind, this conscious, rational part of the mind. There's the animal part of the mind, which is really likened to a gorilla. This cannot speak linguistically. So it really, it's through feelings and emotions we feel this part of the mind. This part of the mind is scanning the environment always. And if there's a threat to our safety, it will shut the rational mind down and it will act. This is known as the fight or flight. What happens is that it shuts the rational mind down. It sends all the blood to the arms and legs, preparing us for battle. Now, in today's world, the threats tend to require our thinking and rational mind, which is why fear is so problematic, because fear shuts down the rational part of the mind, because it elicits the gorilla. And that's why fear is used so often to push narratives, and fear is known as the currency of control. Now, this next bit is the GPS. Now, this is so key, because the GPS effectively represents what we know, our memories, our belief systems. And this is what led Voltaire to say, if you can convince me of absurdities, I can commit atrocities. Because both the conscious mind and the gorilla both access the GPS for its knowledge. There are times where you access the information and you realize it's not true. And many people would have had this, the early days of the satellite navigation systems where you put in an address and you end up down a farm road that's clearly not where you are. There's error in the GPS. If in the GPS system it says masks protect you, then the person that's not questioning that rationally would put a mask on. If they then come across someone not wearing a mask, they would see that person as a threat. They would then not be rational. They'd be very irrational, which led to you seeing videos of people abusing someone without a mask. If all that information in the GPS is absolute nonsense, it makes no difference to the person if they believe it to be true, which is why propaganda and the ability of trust from authorities and the media is such an important point. So let's take an example of putting this into practice. So on the left, we've got the car, we've got the driver, it's left-hand drive car, being the rational mind, we've got the gorilla, and we've got the sat-nav. Now, the person might say, I want to publicly speak, so I want to get up there. But here's the point, you can't overpower the gorilla. So in the GPS system, historically, if Joe had very bad experiences public speaking and he felt it threatened his ego or his safety, the gorilla will take over and it will just avoid it. And this is why so often we avoid what we want. It's not because we consciously don't want it, because we do. It's because the unconscious mind, the gorilla, and the GPS have gremlins in them. And these gremlins are really, installed through much of the education system and our media and our society today. You cannot overpower the gorilla or the GPS, or certainly not for long. So really the power in the conscious mind is to understand how to find out what's driving us and to make sure that the information in that system is actually accurate and what we want it to be. So in this part, we're going to look at why is the data in the GPS so important? How is the data in the GPS held? And do the emotions affect the meaning of the images? And some people, it's really sounds or feelings, but really, how do you know anything is the question that we're going to ask. So if we look at, for a moment, the attention on emotions, etc., this is a representation of how many deaths per illness in June 2021 in the US. And you'll notice that COVID was number 7. And obviously, those in the know would question whether there was that many. But 7 times as many people died of heart disease. But if you ask the average person their fear around any of these illnesses, I bet you that, they really wouldn't have that much fear around most of the illnesses that will probably get them, whereas COVID's unlikely to, but they will have so much fear. So the point here is, it's the emotions that are key. They distort reality. If any of these illnesses had emotional advertising 24/7, then it would probably make it to the top of the list. So really the top of the pots is not by even statistics, it's about emotions. And that's why so many emotions are used in the television. How do we know anything? How do you know the color of your car? So how does Joe know the color of his car? Well, he looks into his mind. He makes a picture in his mind of his car, and then he ascertains that his car is blue. Now, it was very interesting that anything you want to know what it means, you would look at the mental image you have in your mind, which is really the GPS, what's programmed in there. If you've got loads of nonsense in there, then you're not going to really behave in your best interest. If you want to know how dangerous something is, it's going to be not by the statistical average of that illness, it's going to be your pictures and your representations in your mind. How confident are you? Should you stand up against authority? Where did this programming come from? The fact is, the very people that most people need to stand up against are responsible for conditioning people not to stand up, which is a very interesting concept. But come back to the color of the car. Darren Brown has done some incredible work in understanding, how the mind works. And this is one of the videos that I highly recommend people watching. Now, on the left, he's talking to a lady in the pepper mill in Vegas. And he's managed to convince her that black is red and red is black. Now, she goes out and she sees her car and she says, well, that's where I parked my car, but it's the wrong color. So what he's managed to do, he's managed to convince her that the colors have changed. So in fact, that representation in her mind is now changed. Now, that's quite interesting, because when you think about what they've been trying to do the last few years, have definitions been changed in the last few years, even in the dictionary? They have changed the definition in the dictionary. So it really doesn't matter what's true in reality. What really matters is what the people believe to be true. How do people know what's true? They look inside their mind. How do those pictures get inside the mind? Mainly through education, learning, experiences, and stories primarily. But where do most people get their stories from today? It's not from a very moral framework passed on from generation to generation. It's from that corner box in the room, projecting programs and images into people's minds. Now, if they change the dictionary definition of what it is to be a person, or whether a male and female, all these things, which were really, it's almost that the whole definition of what it is to be is being changed. And that's very key. And of course, when you look through history, I mean, this is an advertisement for cigarettes being used as a medical treatment for asthma and hay fever and all these things. Literally, they had 40,000 doctors advising to smoke. So really, should we blindly trust science? No, we need to look at what is real and really understand that. So the key, which is really the main point I want to make, is that there is a differential, right, between reality and the GPS. How closely the GPS to reality is the key. Now, one of the things that's even more important, I think, than a lot of knowledge is how we see ourselves. How does Joe see himself? Much of our education has told us to fit in, get a job, do as we're told, don't question authority, be fearful of standing up, all of these things. Now, that's in the GPS. Now, a lot of it's hidden from us. And once we make that conscious, we can change it. But I would highly advise people looking into this, because one of the things that I've mentioned on videos is where I used to have a bit of a problem standing up to authority, and I dealt with that. And then I was able to go on the marches and talk to police officers and everyone else without any fear. So obviously some point in my history, that kind of fear had pervaded. So the emotions are really key. So what I understand is that within that GPS, the pictures and the emotions associated with them will really dictate our behavior. So the GPS pulling our direction is really key. If we consciously want to speak up, but we feel too scared to do so, people will stay quiet. If you stand up, you will give other people a reason and a role model to stand up. If you are scared, which is perfectly understandable, there are many, many techniques to release this fear, because really so much of us is moving to the path of least resistance. And the authorities effectively have used every nudge of behavioral science possible to get us to comply, to get us to stay quiet. And we have to ask ourselves this question: do we want that to happen, or do we want to take control of our own GPS? Because if we're not programming ourselves, you can bet that somebody else will. Now, once people understand the role of the self-image and how it's so important around confidence and feeling powerful and all these other things, it's really key. Have you noticed how angry people get if you do not follow the guidelines? And that a lot of the time is because they feel threatened, even in their own ability not to stand up, etc. So really, I think we do need a bit of empathy, but we also need to understand what's driving this, because people a lot of the time aren't consciously choosing to be fearful. It's a result of all the propaganda and the psychological manipulation against them. Which leads us on to this key point. The GPS effectively is a story. It's a collection of stories. And there's a thing known as the harmony puzzle, which is people will basically pretend and move things so there's a consistent story, which is why you often hear, so you're telling me so everyone is in on it, blah, blah, blah. They don't have to be in on it. Yeah, people miss that it doesn't have to have a complete harmony. But Plato knew thousands of years ago that those that tell the story rule society because they govern people's GPSs. If you have a rule in society, they have to convince people that people need to be ruled. If people didn't think they needed to be ruled, there wouldn't be a ruling class. Okay, you've got to be, a lot of it is by this consent of the masses. So really, hopefully now that understanding will lead us to the conclusion that the tell lie vision is really that thing in the corner is telling people what to think, what to wear, what to eat, how to act, what to hate, and what to love. They're being programmed. A lot of it now is so advanced in understanding behavioral science that so much of it is beyond the conscious mind. So people aren't aware of what's going on. It's so easy within a program now to create a strong bond between the character and the person watching the movie. By the same token, the villain, you will feel lots of negative emotions towards the villain. That is skillful filmmaking. And if we look at advertising being one of the most effective ways to program the GPS, who is the #1 spend on advertising in 2020? The HM government. So they are spending our money because nothing is government funded. Everything is taxpayer funded. Okay. They have no money. It all comes from the public. So we are paying for our own programming into our GPS, which is quite a thought when you think about it. Okay. This is why we need to understand the process and the mechanism, because it's by understanding the mechanism, we will stop wasting our time having those conscious conversations, and we'll start telling people the stories that really can get through to them. So in summary, to influence outcomes, we need to update the GPS, and that GPS is really people's knowledge. People will take different opinions when they have different information. The problem is getting the information into the GPS because the people pushing the propaganda have tried to protect the information in there from influence, which is why if you say anything against narrative, conspiracy theorists, right-wing, blah, 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 flat earther, because it doesn't fit the narrative, you're going to hit that, but here's the key. If you learn to artfully use stories, metaphors, and ask the right question, the person cannot be faced with anything other than having to update their GPS. A lot of the time you don't get to choose. If you, like so many of the people that become aware, they've been faced with an experience that they couldn't avoid. It may have been a loved one getting ill and then they put some, wrong cert on the death certificate or whatever. But those experiences, and that's why so many videos are being censored that tell stories. They don't really mind people throwing lots of facts because people can't, internalize them. It's all about what makes it into the GPS. Stories tend to be the quickest. It is mostly futile to talk to someone with different views if you do not update the GPS, because all you're going to play is table tennis. You're going to play a game of tennis that he said, she said. They're going to just dismiss everything you say, which is why on our communication workshops, we talk about the 6 steps to go through. It's really worth understanding those. The GPS is always updating. So when a new product comes out, you create the understanding of that product in your GPS. That's what a lot of the advertising is designed to do. So much of the old info remains unchanged, and we fall into confirmation bias and we get stuck in patterns. This does not have to be this way. We can actually elicit the problems in the GPS. I've been doing a number of sessions with a lot of the medical and scientific community, because most of those will have the same issues that society has at large. A fear of standing up to authority, a fear of looking stupid, all of these things. Those bits in the GPS can be released pretty straightforward. If you wish to do on your own, there's many techniques, and I can mention a few of them shortly. So hopefully that makes sense. And when you start to understand this at a deeper level, you'll realize what works and what doesn't work, and then you'll see when something works, and then you really have an understanding. So in summary, we're continuing to put these videos out, hopefully update and supporting the groups. If you would like to support the project, you can donate here or attend one of our workshops to help us out. I will be running a number of sessions each week to provide one-on-one coaching and perception work. If you are interested, you can reach me here. What I would say, you can do a lot of this yourself. I would recommend the Sedona Method book, Emotional Freedom Technique, lots of videos, as there are Sedona Method videos on YouTube, Letting Go by David Hawkins, Holotropic Breathwork. So, and there's a whole numerous other ones. If they get to the emotions and the feelings, they generally can have a very, very powerful effect on the GPS, because it's the emotions that fuel those things. And we'll look into that in another part. So hopefully that was useful. I'm going to stop recording and stop sharing and open it for Q&A.